A young girl sat across from her abductor in a quiet roadside diner, methodically folding and unfolding a napkin in a deliberate pattern. The vampire king seated in the corner booth went completely still. He knew that signal from centuries past, when his kind still safeguarded hers. The kidnapper remained unaware that the ancient being observing them had just made a decision to follow. Alistair had dined at 17 different establishments across 12 states over the past month, and they all carried the same scent: burnt coffee, stale fryer oil, and desperate hope masquerading as apple pie. The Highway Family Diner outside Millbrook was no different. He occupied the corner booth he invariably selected, the one offering an unobstructed view of both exits and every face in the establishment. Old habits from old wars. Even disguised as a traveling insurance salesman in a rumpled suit, even pretending to review emails on a phone that hadn't connected to any human network in 5 years, Alistair remained what he had always been, a predator observing prey. Except he no longer hunted them. Most days he could barely recall why. The waitress brought him coffee he wouldn't drink and a burger he would force down for appearances. She smiled with exhausted eyes and moved on. Alistair's gaze drifted across the diner. Truckers debating routes, a teenage couple sharing fries, an elderly man reading yesterday's newspaper. Then he noticed the girl. She appeared no older than 8, sitting 3 booths away with a man who radiated controlled violence like heat rising from asphalt. The man wore workman's clothing, but his hands were too clean, his posture too rigid. Military or security, Alistair estimated. The girl sat perfectly motionless, not touching the grilled cheese sandwich before her. That wasn't what captured Alistair's attention. It was her hands. She held a paper napkin in her small fingers, crushing it slowly, then smoothing it flat against the table. Crush, smooth, crush, smooth. The rhythm never varied. Her expression remained blank, her eyes downcast, but her hands continued their mechanical motion. Alistair's chest constricted. He recognized that pattern. 3 crushes, 2 smooths, pause. 3 crushes, 2 smooths, pause. It was the old hybrid distress code used centuries ago when his kind and theirs had lived in careful alliance. Before the wars, before the purges, before vampires withdrew into mythology and hybrids scattered into extinction. No human child should know that code. No child born in the last 100 years should know it existed. Alistair's eyes locked on the girl, and as though she sensed his stare, her head lifted. For just a moment their eyes met. Hers were dark, too old for her young face, and filled with a terror so profound it made something inside Alistair's chest fracture. She held his gaze for exactly 2 heartbeats. Then her eyes flickered, once toward the man beside her, once back to Alistair. A deliberate movement. A signal within a signal. Help me. Alistair's hand tightened around his coffee cup, and he forced himself to breathe normally. He had walked away from this world, from rescues and wars and causes worth dying for. He had spent the last decade drifting from town to town, pretending to be human, pretending the past didn't clod him every time he closed his eyes. But that signal, that impossible, ancient signal. The man beside the girl suddenly seized her wrist hard enough to make her wince. He leaned close and whispered something that drained the color from her face. Then he stood, yanking her out of the booth with the casual violence of someone accustomed to hurting smaller things. "We're leaving," the man announced loudly enough for the entire diner to hear, his tone suggesting he anticipated no objection. The girl didn't resist. She moved like a puppet, one hand clutching her small backpack, the other still holding the crumpled napkin. As they passed Alistair's booth, she released it. The white paper landed silently on the floor between them. Alistair watched them walk toward the exit. Every instinct he had honed over 4 centuries of existence screamed at him to move, but he waited, counting seconds, watching the other diners return to their meals, the moment already forgotten. The bell above the door chimed as they departed. Alistair dropped a $20 bill on the table, far too much for a burger he had barely touched, and rose smoothly. He bent and retrieved the napkin as he walked, palming it without looking. Outside, the parking lot stretched beneath weak streetlights. A semi-truck rumbled to life. A family loaded luggage into a minivan. The man was shoving the girl into the back of a dirty white sedan parked in the darkest corner of the lot. Alistair moved toward his own vehicle, an unremarkable gray Honda that he had purchased for cash 3 towns ago. He slipped behind the wheel but didn't start the engine, not yet. He spread the napkin across his lap and studied it in the dim light. 3 creases, deliberate and deep. The hybrid sign for child in danger. But there was something else, a tiny tear in the upper right corner. It took Alistair a moment to recognize it, the mark of bloodline significance. His hands went still. A hybrid child of bloodline importance here in an insignificant town off an insignificant highway, in the custody of a man who smelled like gunpowder and possessed the cold efficiency of someone who bought and sold living things. The white sedan's engine started. Alistair watched the man lean back and pull out a phone, his face illuminated by its screen. The girl sat motionless in the back seat, her face a pale blur through the tinted window. The man's voice carried across the parking lot, just loud enough for Alistair's supernatural hearing to catch fragments. Have the package tomorrow morning. Yes, she's compliant. The buyers are confirmed. Buyers. The word struck Alistair like a physical blow. He understood what it meant. He had heard it before and whispered reports from refugees, and intelligence gathered from the few hybrids still in contact with vampire networks. There was a laboratory run by humans who had discovered the existence of supernatural beings and decided to profit from them. They purchased children mostly. Hybrids were easiest to contain, their powers still developing, their bodies ideal for experimentation. Alistair had told himself those rumors were exaggerated, that the war was over and the hiding was working, that he could walk away from it all and find something resembling peace. The sedan pulled out of the parking lot heading north on the highway. Alistair started his engine and followed. He maintained a 3-car distance, his lights blending with traffic. The man drove carefully, obeying speed limits, nothing to attract attention. Smart. Professional. This wasn't his first delivery. Alistair's mind raced through possibilities. The girl knew the code. That meant someone had taught her, someone old enough to remember, someone who had hoped she would never need to use it, but made certain she could. There was only one hybrid woman Alistair had known well enough to have taught that code, Serena. He had protected her decades ago during the last purge, helped her escape west when the hunters came. She disappeared after that, and he had assumed, like everyone else, that she had eventually been caught and killed. If this girl was Serena's daughter, if Serena had somehow survived and hidden her child, the sedan's turn signal activated, pulling into a cheap motel off the highway, the Starlight Motor Lodge, its neon sign buzzing and half-dead. Andrea drove past, circling back to park at a gas station across the street. He watched through the darkness as the man dragged the girl into a ground-floor room. The door closed. A light came on behind thin curtains. Andrea sat in his car and waited for true night to fall. The last light of dusk faded from the sky. The motel's parking lot emptied as travelers found their rooms. Midnight came and went. At 2 a.m, Andrea finally moved. He crossed the street like a shadow, his footsteps making no sound. The motel room was on the ground floor, exactly as he had noted. He could hear the man's heartbeat inside, slow and steady with sleep, and beneath it, softer, faster, the girl's racing heart. She was still awake, still terrified, still waiting. Andrea looked at the door and made his choice, the one he had been running from for a decade, the one that would pull him back into a world of violence and blood and wars that never truly ended. But that girl in there had signaled for help using a code from another age, and somewhere, somehow, someone she loved had made certain she would know it. He wouldn't let that courage go unanswered. Andrea circled the motel like smoke, testing every angle, every shadow. The building was cheap construction, thin walls, inferior locks, windows that hadn't been properly secured in years. Easy enough to breach, but the parking lot had security cameras, probably half of them broken, but he couldn't risk even one working feed showing something impossible. He needed to wait, to observe, to understand what he was walking into before he made a move that could expose everything. The girl's heartbeat hadn't slowed. 3 hours past midnight, and she was still awake, still afraid. Andrea positioned himself behind a dumpster with a clear view of the room's window. The curtains were drawn, but not completely closed, a half-inch gap that allowed him to see movement inside. At 4 a.m, the man's phone rang. Andrea heard him curse, stumbling out of bed. Through the gap in the curtains, he watched the man pace, phone pressed to his ear. The conversation was brief, clipped, professional. Then the man stepped outside to smoke, and Andrea heard everything. Tomorrow noon, like we agreed, the package is secure. No, she hasn't caused problems. She's terrified, which makes it easier. A pause. I know what the buyers are paying. $500,000 for a bloodline specimen. I'm not risking that for anything. Bloodline specimen. The words confirmed what Andrea had suspected. This wasn't random human trafficking. This was targeted hunting. The lab has the containment ready. Good. Last thing I need is her manifesting abilities during transport. Another pause. Longer this time. Yeah, I heard about what happened to the last group. That's why I drugged her water. She'll be compliant until delivery. Andrea's jaw tightened. Drugged. That was why the girl had seemed so still, so compliant. They were keeping her sedated enough to suppress her hybrid abilities without rendering her completely unconscious. The mother's still alive, right? Andrea asked. Andrea's entire body went rigid. I want my bonus if this leads to the breeding program. Perfect. See you tomorrow. The man ended the call and lit his cigarette, staring out at the empty highway. He stood there for 5 minutes, smoking slowly, completely unaware that death stood 15 feet away, watching him with ancient eyes. Andrea forced himself to remain still. Killing the man now would accomplish nothing except alerting whoever was on the other end of that phone call. He needed to know where they were taking her, needed to understand the full scope of this operation. But that phrase kept echoing in his mind. The mother still alive. Serena, it had to be. They had Serena, and they used her to find her daughter. The genetic connection would have made it easy. Hybrids carried distinctive markers in their blood. If they had been experimenting on Serena for years, they would have mapped every aspect of her DNA. Finding her child would have been simple after that. The man finished his cigarette and went back inside. Andrea heard him check the girl, a rustle of fabric, a whimper quickly silenced, before returning to bed. His heartbeat slowed back into sleep within minutes. Andrea stayed in the shadows, his mind working through possibilities. A laboratory that experimented on hybrids, buyers willing to pay $500,000 for a single child. A breeding program. This wasn't some small-time operation. This was organized, funded, and protected by people with enough power to operate in complete secrecy. The kind of operation that would have eliminated witnesses already if Andrea had been anyone else. But they didn't know he existed. Didn't know that their perfect delivery had been compromised the moment that little girl had signaled in the diner. Dawn approached. Gray light bleeding across the horizon, Andrea watched the man wake, shower, and load the girl into the sedan without a word. She moved like a sleepwalker, the drug still heavy in her system. She clutched her backpack, but her eyes were unfocused, distant. The sedan pulled out of the parking lot, heading north again. Andrea followed them at a distance, tracking them through scent now as much as sight. Hybrid blood had a distinctive signature, like honey and rain, and something older than words. Even through the drug suppression, the girl's scent carried on the wind. He could have followed her from miles away. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the highway for rural roads that twisted into mountain country. The landscape changed from flat farmland to dense forest. Towns became scarce, then disappeared entirely. They were heading somewhere remote, somewhere hidden. The sedan turned onto an unmarked dirt road. Andrea stopped his car and continued on foot, moving through the trees faster than any human could track. His body remembered this, the hunt, the chase, the primal satisfaction of closing distance on prey that didn't know it was being stalked. The dirt road led to a building disguised as an abandoned sawmill. Old equipment rusted in the yard. Trees grew through broken windows. The whole structure screamed forgotten. But Andrea's senses told a different story. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, recent repairs disguised under weathering, the hum of generators buried underground, and beneath it all, the scent of fear. Multiple sources. Children. The sedan pulled into a garage built into the hillside, doors closing automatically behind it. Andrea circled the perimeter, memorizing guard positions, camera placements, entry points. Professional security disguised as abandonment. The lab was here, underground, probably built into the mountain itself. He found a ventilation shaft and listened. Voices below, equipment humming, and somewhere deep in that facility, hybrid children crying. Andrea pulled back into the forest and waited for night. He had seen enough. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. This was war. Alistair waited until the facility settled into its night rhythm. Guards changed shifts at 10 o'clock, their patterns predictable.
their attention focused on external threats rather than anything approaching from above. They weren't expecting a vampire. Nobody expected vampires anymore. That was the advantage of being a myth. He had watched the building for hours, mapping every movement, every weakness. The girl had been taken inside 6 hours ago, moved through a service entrance into the underground levels. Her scent trail led down, always down, into the mountain's belly. But Alistair didn't go there, not yet. The man who had delivered her had been given a room in the facility's staff quarters, a small building separate from the main structure, temporary housing for contractors and transporters. Alistair could smell cheap whiskey and cigarette smoke coming from inside. The man was celebrating his payday. He wouldn't get to enjoy it. Alistair moved across the roof like water, silent and inevitable. The motel room had been too public, too risky. But here, in the middle of nowhere, with guards focused on keeping people in rather than out, here he could work. The window was locked but old. Alistair's fingers found the frame, applied pressure, and the latch gave with barely a sound. He slipped inside and stood in the darkness, watching the man sleep. It would be easy. So easy. One movement and this particular monster would stop breathing. But the man's phone sat on the nightstand, still lit with recent messages. Alistair picked it up, scrolling through communications with supernatural speed. Delivery confirmations, payment transfers, and most importantly, a facility map sent earlier that day showing room assignments. The girl was in cell block D, room 7, marked as pre-processing. Alistair memorized the route and left the way he had come, leaving the man alive for now. Bodies raised alarms, and he needed surprise more than satisfaction. The main facility entrance was a kill zone. Cameras, motion sensors, guards with weapons that looked modified, probably loaded with silver or iron, the old reliable ways to hurt supernatural beings. But the ventilation system was older, built before modern security standards. Alistair found the access point on the east side, removed the grating, and descended into darkness. The shaft was narrow, but he had squeezed through worse. He moved through metal tunnels by feel and scent, following the girl's trail like a bloodhound. Down, always down, past administrative levels and storage areas, past what smelled like medical facilities, until finally reaching what could only be the cell blocks. He found the grating that opened into her room and peered through. She sat on a cot pushed against the wall, wide awake despite the late hour. The drugs had worn off enough for clarity to return to her eyes, but not enough for her abilities to manifest. Smart dosing. They had done this before. Alistair worked the grating loose and dropped silently into the room. The girl's head snapped up. For a moment, they stared at each other. Ancient vampire and hybrid child. Two beings that shouldn't exist meeting in a place designed to unmake them. She didn't scream. Instead, she tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that reminded Alistair painfully of Serena. The same dark eyes, the same way of looking at people, like she could see through flesh to the truth underneath. "You followed me," she whispered, "from the restaurant." "I did." She stood slowly, still unsteady from the drugs. "Are you—" She paused, searching for words. "Are you like my mother?" The question hit harder than Alistair expected. She knew. Serena had told her about vampires, about hybrids, about the hidden world most humans never glimpsed. "No," he said carefully, "but I knew your mother a long time ago." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "They have her. They took her when I was little. And the family that kept me, they weren't bad people, but they were scared. A man came with money and Her voice broke. They sold me. What's your name? Luna. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My mother taught me the signals before they took her. She said if I was ever in danger, if I ever saw someone with old eyes, I should signal, that the old ones would remember. I remember. Luna moved closer, close enough that Alistair could see the hybrid markings beginning to show at her temples, faint silver lines that would eventually form patterns unique to her bloodline. Can you get me out? I'm going to try. And my mother? Alistair hesitated. He didn't know if Serena was even in this facility. Didn't know if she was alive or just mentioned in communications as past tense. But looking at Luna's desperate face, he couldn't say that. Her too, he said. Luna nodded, then suddenly tensed. Someone's coming. Alistair heard it too. Footsteps in the corridor, keys jangling. He moved toward the ventilation shaft, but Luna grabbed his arm. Wait! She pulled a napkin from her pocket. Where she had gotten it, he didn't know, and quickly folded it into the old pattern. 3 creases, but this time she added a 4th, smaller fold at the corner. Then she dropped it on the floor near the cot. The door began to open. Alistair was through the vent and replacing the grating in seconds, invisible in the darkness above. He watched through the metal slats as a guard entered, shining a flashlight around the room. Heard talking, the guard said suspiciously. Bad dreams, Luna said, her voice small and scared, in exactly the way a traumatized child should sound. Perfect performance. The guard grunted, noticed the napkin on the floor. What's this? Just paper. I was folding it. It helps me think. He picked it up, studied it for a moment, then tossed it back. Lights out in 5 minutes. Tomorrow's processing day. He left, locking the door behind him. Alistair waited until the footsteps faded. Luna looked up at the vent, directly at where he crouched in shadow, and mouthed 2 words. Take me. Then she lay down on the cot, facing the wall, trusting that he had understood. The 4th fold, the old signal for trust given. She was ready. Alistair made his way back through the ventilation system, his mind already working through extraction plans. But one problem remained. It was still night, hours before dawn, but the facility would be most active during daytime. Security would be tightest. Moving her then would risk everything. He would have to wait for tomorrow night. 24 hours. Luna had to survive 24 more hours in this place. He just hoped that would be enough. Alistair spent the day hidden in the forest, watching the facility with growing unease. Too many vehicles came and went, too much activity for a place pretending to be abandoned. Trucks delivered supplies through the underground garage, guards changed shifts every 4 hours like clockwork, and at noon a black SUV with tinted windows arrived, staying for exactly 30 minutes before leaving. Buyers, probably, inspecting merchandise. He had planned to wait for nightfall to extract Luna under cover of darkness, when the facility operated with minimal staff, but at 2 p.m, everything changed. A white van pulled up to the loading area, different from the supply trucks, windowless and reinforced. Alistair's enhanced vision caught the details: modified suspension for weight, extra locks on the rear doors, and a driver who moved with military precision. Transport vehicle. Through the open garage door, he saw guards bringing Luna out. She was handcuffed, a black hood over her head, stumbling between two armed men. They weren't waiting until tomorrow. They were moving her now.
Alistair cursed under his breath. Daylight extraction was suicide. Too many witnesses, too many cameras, too much risk of exposure. But if that Dan left with Luna inside, tracking it through rural mountain roads would be nearly impossible. They would have her locked in the laboratory before he could plan another approach. He had minutes to decide. The van's engine started. Guards performed final checks. Luna was shoved into the back, the doors slamming shut with the finality of a coffin closing. Alistair made his choice. He moved through the forest at supernatural speed, circling ahead of the van's route. The facility had only one road out, the same dirt path he had followed yesterday. It wound through 5 miles of dense trees before connecting to the highway. Somewhere in that stretch, he would have to make his move. The van emerged from the garage, followed by a security car. 2 vehicles, probably 6 armed guards total. Professional operation. They weren't taking chances. Alistair reached an abandoned gas station 3 miles down the road. Really abandoned this time, not disguised. Pumps stripped for parts, building collapsed on one side, weeds growing through cracked concrete. Perfect ambush point. He positioned himself behind the ruined building and waited. The van appeared 2 minutes later, moving cautiously over the rough road. The security car followed at a distance, keeping visual contact but spacing for tactical response. Smart. They had done this before. Alistair stepped into the road. The van's brakes screamed. The driver's face went white. 1 second the road was empty, the next, a man in a dark coat stood directly in front of them, completely still, like he had materialized from nothing. The security car stopped behind them. Doors opened. Guards emerged with weapons drawn. Not standard firearms, Alistair noticed, but something else. Modified barrels, specialized ammunition. "Move," the driver shouted through the window. "Move or we will shoot." Alistair didn't move. He let his aura leak out just enough for anyone with supernatural sensitivity to feel it. Ancient, powerful, deadly. "Give me the girl," he said quietly, knowing they would hear him perfectly in the sudden silence. The lead guard's face changed from aggressive to uncertain. "What are you?" "Give me the girl and walk away. Last chance." The guard's finger moved toward his radio. Alistair saw it happening. The call for backup, the alert that would bring the entire facility down on this location. He moved, closing the distance in a blur, and wrenched the radio from the guard's hand. That was when everything went wrong. The guard didn't panic. Instead, he pressed a button on his vest, one Alistair hadn't seen, disguised as normal tactical peer. A silent alarm. "You just made a mistake," the guard said. He heard them before he saw them. Helicopters, still distant but closing fast, and on the road behind them, more vehicles emerging from the facility. They had a backup plan for exactly this scenario, a silent panic button that brought overwhelming force without giving targets time to escape. He could kill everyone here easily, but the helicopters had cameras, and whatever was in those approaching vehicles probably included tranquilizer systems designed for supernatural targets. If he revealed his full capabilities on camera, if he showed what vampires could really do, he would expose his entire species. 4 centuries of carefully maintained mythology would crumble because he couldn't control himself for one child. The helicopters came into view over the tree line. Alistair looked at the van where Luna was trapped. He could hear her heartbeat through the metal walls, rapid with fear, could smell her terror. She knew something was happening but couldn't see anything through the hood. "I'm sorry," he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him. Then he disappeared into the forest, moving faster than human eyes could track. Behind him, guards shouted in confusion. The helicopters circled uselessly, but Alistair was already gone, a shadow swallowed by deeper shadows. He ran for 2 miles before stopping, his chest tight with rage and shame. He had failed. Walked into their trap because he had been too eager, too confident in abilities that meant nothing against preparation and technology. Through the trees, he heard the van's engine start again, continuing its journey.
Alistair pulled out the phone he had stolen from Luna's kidnapper last night. He had taken it before leaving his room, wiping it and powering it off. Now he turned it on, scrolling through messages until he found what he needed. An address, coordinates for the laboratory where Luna was being taken, and buried in the deleted files, something else. A personnel roster showing active test subjects. Subject 47, Serena. Status, active. Location, sublevel 3, medical wing. She was alive. They had kept her alive for years, draining her, studying her, using her to perfect their techniques. And now they had her daughter too. Alistair watched the last helicopter disappear over the mountains. His hands trembled with the effort of controlling himself. Every instinct screamed at him to chase the van, to tear through metal and flesh until Luna was free. But he had learned something today. Brute force wouldn't work here. They were prepared for supernatural threats, expecting them. He needed a different approach, needed to be smarter than his rage. Luna had looked up at that vent and trusted him with those 2 words, "Take me." He had failed her once. He wouldn't fail her again. Night fell over the mountains like a curtain dropping, and Alistair moved with it. The coordinates from the stolen phone led him deeper into wilderness than he had expected. 20 miles from the sawmill facility, up a mountain road that didn't appear on any map. The laboratory wasn't hidden inside an existing structure this time. It had been carved directly into the mountain itself, with only a small entrance building visible from the outside. Everything else was underground, buried in stone and concrete where satellites couldn't see and locals wouldn't stumble across. Alistair approached from above, scaling the mountain's far side and working his way down through rock formations that would challenge experienced climbers. For him, it was meditation. His fingers found holds in stone. His body remembered the weight of centuries, and the anger that had burned in him since the failed extraction cooled into something more useful: focus. He reached an outcropping that overlooked the entrance, 3 guards visible, probably a dozen more inside. Security cameras covered every approach angle, but Alistair wasn't interested in the front door. He had studied the stolen phone for hours, memorizing every file, every schematic that the kidnapper had been sent. The laboratory's ventilation system was more sophisticated than the sawmill's, but it still needed air intake vents, large ones, built into the mountain face 30 feet below his current position. Alistair descended in silence and removed the grating that covered the largest vent. The shaft beyond was wide enough for him to move through if he didn't mind tight spaces. He minded, but Luna didn't have the luxury of his discomfort. The ventilation system led him through the mountain's interior like an arterial system. He passed over storage rooms and administrative offices, then deeper into the facility's core. The air changed, became sterile, chemical-laden. Medical wing. He found a grating that looked down into a corridor and paused. 2 guards stood outside a door marked Processing Room 3. Through the small window in the door, Alistair saw Luna strapped to a medical chair, still hooded, while technicians in white coats prepared equipment. They were processing her for the auction, taking samples, running tests, documenting her abilities before the buyers arrived tomorrow.
Alistair memorized the room's location and kept moving. He needed to find Serena first, understand the full layout, then plan an extraction that wouldn't end like this afternoon's disaster. Sublevel 3, medical wing. That was where the roster had placed her. He descended through the ventilation system, following signs and airflow patterns until he reached the deeper levels. Here, the facility's true purpose became impossible to ignore. Through grating after grating, he saw them. Cells modified to hold supernatural beings. Silver-lined walls for vampire containment, iron bars for fae, reinforced glass for shifters. And in the cells, prisoners. Most were children or teenagers, their eyes hollow with despair. Hybrids primarily, easier to capture and control than pure-blooded supernatural beings. Each cell had a number and a designation. Specimen 23, tracking studies. Specimen 31, ability suppression research. Specimen 38, bloodline analysis. Alistair's jaw tightened. This wasn't a rogue operation. This was systematic genocide disguised as science. He found the medical wing on sublevel 3, a series of rooms behind security doors that required keycard access. Through the vents, he could see into observation rooms, surgery suites, and recovery cells. Then he found her. Cell 47, Serena. She lay on a hospital bed behind glass walls, hooked to machines that monitored her vital signs. She had aged. Hybrids didn't have vampire immortality, but he recognized her immediately. The same dark hair, now streaked with gray. The same sharp features, now carved by suffering. Her arms bore track marks from countless injections, her skin too pale from constant blood draws. But she was alive. Alistair's hands tightened on the Venn grating. He wanted to tear it open, to get to her now, but forced himself to wait, to observe. A technician entered Serena's cell and checked her vitals. She didn't react, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The technician made notes on a tablet and left. The door locked automatically behind him. Alistair waited until the corridor cleared, then removed the grating and dropped silently into the hallway. He was outside Serena's cell in 3 steps, studying the lock mechanism. Keycard reader combined with numeric code. He could force it, but that would trigger alarms. Instead, he pressed his palm against the glass and reached out with the barest thread of supernatural energy. Not enough to set off sensors, just enough to be felt. Serena's eyes shifted toward the glass. For a moment, she stared at her own reflection. Then she saw him in the shadows beyond, and her entire body went rigid. Her lips moved, forming a name without sound. Alistair. He nodded once. She sat up slowly, disconnecting herself from monitors with practiced efficiency. She had done this before, Alistair realized. Had disconnected and reconnected so many times the technicians didn't bother restraining her anymore. What was the point when there was nowhere to run? Serena moved to the glass and pressed her palm against it, mirroring his position. They stayed like that for a moment, separated by 2 inches of reinforced glass and decades of assumed death. Then she started signing in the old hybrid hand language. Her movements were weak, but clear. Luna. They have Luna. Alistair signed back. I know. I came for both of you. Auction tomorrow. Buyers at noon. I know. Serena's face crumpled. They'll separate us. Different facilities. I'll never find her again. That won't happen. How can you trust me? She studied his face through the glass, reading the determination there. Finally, she signed. The files. Destroy the files. They have genetic maps, bloodline records. If they keep those, they'll hunt us forever. Alistair nodded. He had been planning to burn the entire facility, but she was right. Data could be backed up, transmitted, copied. He needed to find their servers, their records, everything they had learned. A door opened down the corridor, guards beginning their rounds. Alistair pointed up at the vent, then held up 2 fingers. 2 nights from now. Serena nodded, understanding. He was back in the ventilation system before the guards turned the corner, moving silently through metal tunnels while his mind worked through the new variables. 2 rescues instead of 1. Files to destroy, security to bypass without triggering lockdown, and less than 24 hours before Luna was auctioned off. The impossible mission had just become worse. But as Alistair made his way back to the surface, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose, clean and sharp and absolute. These people had turned suffering into profit, had caged children and called it science. Tomorrow, they would learn what happened when you put monsters in cages and forgot that bigger monsters still walked free. Alistair returned to the facility before dawn, this time with purpose beyond reconnaissance. He had spent the remaining night hours acquiring supplies from a town 30 miles away. Bolt cutters, thermite charges, a laptop that could interface with security systems, tools for a vampire who had decided that satility had failed. But before the violence, he needed answers. He descended through the ventilation system to sublevel 3, timing his arrival for the gap between guard rotations.
The corridors were empty at 5 in the morning, most staff not arriving until 7, skeleton crew only. Serena's cell was exactly where he had left her. She sat on the edge of her bed, wide awake, as though she had been waiting. When Alistair removed the vent grating, she stood immediately. He studied the cell door's lock mechanism, key card and code, just as before. But he had watched the technician yesterday, had seen the code entered from his vantage point in the vent, 6 digits. He pulled a small electromagnetic device from his pocket, stolen from the same town as the other supplies, and placed it against the card reader. The device cycled through frequencies until the lock clicked, then he punched in the code, 742819. The door unsealed with a hydraulic hiss. Serena stared at him, tears already forming in her eyes. "You actually came back? I always intended to. But we don't have much time. I need you to tell me everything. How they found Luna, where she's being kept now, and how we get both of you out." Serena sat back down, her hands trembling. "They didn't find her by accident. Her voice broke. I told them where she was." Alistair went still. "You told them?" "Not willingly." She looked at her scarred arms, the track marks that mapped years of torture. 6 months ago, they changed their approach, stopped just taking blood and tissue samples, started using psychological techniques. They brought in a hybrid telepath, another prisoner, a boy maybe 16. They threatened to kill him slowly unless I gave them information. "So you gave them Luna?" "I gave them a name, a town, a family. I thought I was protecting her by hiding her with humans. I found a couple who couldn't have children, gave them money, made them promise to raise her away from this world. For 8 years it worked. She was safe, normal, until I broke." "Everyone breaks eventually, Serena. Even you would have." She met his eyes, defiant despite the shame. "They told me they just wanted blood samples, said if I cooperated, they'd leave her with the family. I was stupid enough to believe them. They lied." "Of course they lied." Serena laughed bitterly. 2 weeks after I talked, Luna disappeared. The family that kept her received $100,000. Clean transaction, forged adoption papers, everything. Alistair paced the small cell, processing this. "The man who brought her here, he mentioned a breeding program." Serena's face went pale. "That's their new initiative. They've mapped hybrid genetics completely. Now they want to see if they can create hybrids artificially, control the traits, make designer specimens for different buyers. Luna and I together give them generational data. Mother and daughter, both with strong bloodlines."
Where is she now? Holding cell on sublevel 1. They're keeping her isolated until the auction at noon. Serena stood, moving closer to him. "But Alistair, you can't just break in and take her. The security system is tied to explosive failsafes. If they detect a breach during business hours, the entire facility goes into lockdown. Steel doors seal every section. Ventilation shuts down. We'd be trapped." "Then I do it before business hours." "The guards will still be here. 30 men with weapons designed to kill supernatural beings. Silver bullets, iron rounds, UV grenades for vampires." She grabbed his arm. "I've seen what those weapons do. Watched them use them on prisoners who try to escape. You're powerful, but you're not invincible." "I don't need to be invincible. I just need to be fast." Serena searched his face, reading the determination there. Finally, she sighed. "There's another way, a safer way." "I'm listening." "The auction. When the buyers arrive, security will be focused on protecting them, not on prisoners. The facility will be in presentation mode. Everything clean, controlled, impressive. That's when systems are most vulnerable." "You want me to wait until they bring Luna out to be sold?" "I want you to let me help." Serena's voice hardened with purpose. "I've been here 6 years. I know every guard rotation, every camera blind spot, every security protocol. I know where they store the genetic records, encrypted servers in the director's office on sublevel 2. I know where the backup generators are, how long it takes for emergency systems to activate, and which doors can be forced without triggering facility-wide lockdown." Alistair studied her. "You've been planning this."
For years. But I couldn't do it alone. I'm too weak, too monitored. But with you, she smiled grimly. With you, we can burn this entire place to the ground. What about the other prisoners? What about them? I saw at least 20 cells. Children. Are we leaving them? Serena's expression shifted, surprise, then something like hope. You'd risk the mission to save them? The mission is to end this operation. That means all of them. She nodded slowly. Then we'll need a distraction, something big enough to pull guards away from the cell blocks. I can provide that. And you'll need me conscious and mobile. They give me suppressant drugs every morning at 7. If I refuse them, they'll restrain me. Alistair checked his watch. 6:45. We have 15 minutes. Then here's the plan. Serena moved to the cell's small desk and began sketching a crude map on a piece of paper with a pen sheet hidden. At noon, buyers arrive through the main entrance. Luna will be in the presentation room here. I'll be in my cell, monitored but not restrained. You cause a fire in the East Wing generator room here. Wing guards respond, you enter through the west ventilation shaft here and reach Luna's location. What about you? I disconnect my monitors, trigger my own medical alarm. When the technician comes, I take his keycard and make my way to the server room. I destroy the files while you're getting Luna. And if something goes wrong? Serena looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering to fear death. At least Luna has a chance. That's more than I've given her in 6 years. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. The morning shift was arriving early. Alistair moved toward the vent. Stay alive until noon. I'll handle the rest. Alistair. She stopped him with a hand on his arm. Thank you for not abandoning us. I abandoned you once when I assumed you were dead. I won't make that mistake again. She was back in the ventilation system before the guards entered the corridor. Below him, he heard the cell door reseal, heard Serena greet the technician with calm acceptance. She was right about one thing. Everyone breaks eventually. But sometimes broken people were the most dangerous ones. Alistair watched the buyers arrive at exactly noon. 3 black SUVs, tinted windows, diplomatic plates that meant nothing and everything. 6 men in expensive suits emerged, greeted by the facility director, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. They entered through the main building, security parting for them like water. Alistair was already in position in the East Wing, crouched in the darkness near the generator room. He had spent the morning preparing. Thermite charges planted on fuel lines, emergency exits sabotaged, escape routes memorized. The facility had been built to keep prisoners in, not to stop threats from dismantling it systematically. Through the ventilation system, he heard the director's voice over the PA system. Gentlemen, welcome to our presentation. Today we are offering a rare opportunity, a verified blood mine hybrid, age 8, female, with documented abilities including empathic sensitivity and trace precognition. Bidding starts at 500,000. Luna. They were auctioning Luna like livestock? Alistair lit the first thermite charge and dropped it on the fuel line. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. Fire bloomed through the generator room, alarms shrieking as emergency systems activated. Sprinklers engaged, but thermite burned hot enough to laugh at water. Smoke began pouring through corridors, thick and black. Over the PA. Fire in East Wing. All security to East Wing. Evacuate buyers to safe room. Perfect chaos. Alistair was already moving, racing through ventilation shafts towards sublevel 1. Below him, he heard boots pounding as guards abandoned their posts, converging on the fire. The facility's automated systems sealed the East Wing, trying to contain the damage. He reached the presentation room and looked down through the grating. Luna sat in a glass-walled chamber, pristine, clinical, designed to showcase prisoners without allowing contact. She wore a white dress someone had forced on her, her hair brushed and neat, making her look innocent, marketable. The buyers stood on the other side of the glass, examining her like a painting. The director spoke into a microphone. As you can see, the specimen is compliant. The lights went out. Alistair had cut the backup generators on his way here. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. What's happening? One of the buyers demanded. Just a precaution, gentlemen. Please remain calm. Alistair dropped from the ceiling. He landed in the center of the presentation room, between Luna's chamber and the buyers. For a moment, nobody moved. They simply stared at this man who had appeared from nowhere, who stood in emergency lighting like something from a nightmare. Then the director screamed, "Security! Security!" Alistair moved. He crossed to Luna's chamber and drove his fist through the reinforced glass. It shattered like sugar. He reached in and pulled her out, breaking the restraints that held her as easily as breaking spider silk. She looked at him with huge eyes. "You came back. I told you I would." Guards burst into the room, weapons raised. Alistair positioned himself between them and Luna, and for the first time since entering this facility, he let his true nature show. His eyes shifted from human brown to the burning gold of an ancient predator. His aura expanded, filling the room with a presence that made the human hindbrain scream in terror. "Run," he told the buyers calmly, "while you still can." They ran. The guards, to their credit, held their ground. They opened fire, silver bullets that would have killed a younger vampire. But Alistair was old, and silver only slowed him. He moved through their gunfire like wind, disarming them with surgical precision, breaking arms, not necks, leaving them alive but incapacitated. He wasn't a monster. Not today. "Hold on," he told Luna. She wrapped her arms around his neck. He ran, carrying her through corridors that were filling with smoke. Behind them, more guards appeared. Ahead, steel security doors were beginning to seal.
Alistar reached the first door and tore it from its tracks, the hydraulic systems screaming in protest. They made it to sub-level 3, just as Serena emerged from the director's office, a laptop tucked under her arm and a fire extinguisher in her hand. "The files?" Alistar asked. "Downloaded and destroyed. The servers are slag." She saw Luna, and her face transformed. "Baby!" "Mom!" Luna reached for her mother, and Serena pulled her daughter into her arms, both of them crying. "Reunion later," Alistar said. "We have company." More guards were coming from both directions. They were trapped in the corridor with nowhere to go but through them. Serena set Luna down and stepped forward. "My turn." Her hands began to glow with silver light, hybrid abilities no longer suppressed by drugs. She slammed her palms together, and a shockwave of pure energy exploded outward, knocking guards off their feet without killing them. "I've been saving that for 6 years," she said grimly. Together, they fought their way to the cell blocks. Alistar tore open cell doors, while Serena used her recovered abilities to disable security systems. Children emerged, confused and terrified. Hybrids, young shifters, even one terrified vampire child who couldn't have been more than 50 years old. "Follow us," Alistar commanded. "Stay together, don't stop." They moved as a group, a ragtag army of prisoners following 2 warriors through smoke and chaos. The facility structure was failing, fire spreading beyond the East Wing. Guards tried to stop them, but Serena and Alistar cut through resistance like a blade. They reached the main entrance to find it sealed. "Stand back," Alistar said. He gathered his full strength and drove both fists into the reinforced door. Once, twice, the third impact tore it completely free. Sunlight streamed into the underground facility. The prisoners fled into daylight, running for the forest. Alistar turned back to the burning facility. Somewhere inside, the director and her staff were trying to salvage what they could. Let them try. The files were destroyed. The prisoners were free. This laboratory was finished. Serena took his hand. Luna stood between them. "Time to go," Serena said softly. Together, they walked into the light. Behind them, the mountain facility collapsed into itself, smoke rising into the clear sky like a funeral pyre. The coastal town of Crescent Bay existed in the space between maps, a place too small to matter and too remote to attract attention. Exactly the kind of place where people who needed to disappear could start over. Alistair had brought Serena and Luna here 4 days after the mountain facility burned. The safe house was an old Victorian on the cliff edge, protected by wards older than the building itself. Vampire magic woven into stone and wood, making it invisible to anyone who meant harm. Luna stood on the beach, barefoot in the sand, watching waves crash against rocks. The morning sun painted everything gold,
and for the first time since Alistar had met her in that diner, she looked like a child instead of a prisoner. "She's been out there for an hour," Serena said, joining him on the porch. She looked stronger already, color returning to her cheeks, the haunted look in her eyes beginning to fade. Just watching the ocean. Let her. She's earned some peace. Serena nodded, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the coastal wind. "The other children? Have you heard anything?" "They're being placed with supernatural families. Covens, packs, vampire houses that still maintain the old protection agreements. They'll be safe. Because of what you did. Because of what we did." Alistar watched Luna bend to pick up a shell, examining it with the focus children reserve for treasures. "You destroyed the files. Without those, the organization can't rebuild their research. We set them back decades. They'll try again. People like that always do. Let them try." Alistar's voice carried an edge of steel. "Next time, I'll know what to look for, and I won't hesitate." Serena studied his profile. "You've changed. The Alistar I knew decades ago would have walked away after the rescue, would have said it wasn't his problem anymore. Maybe I got tired of walking away. Or maybe you remembered what you were fighting for." She touched his arm gently. "Thank you for everything, for not giving up when the first extraction failed, for coming back when you could have stayed hidden. I made a promise to a little girl using a signal from another age. I wasn't about to break it." Luna turned and waved at them from the beach. Serena waved back, her eyes filling with tears she didn't try to hide. "I thought I'd lost her," Serena whispered. "For 6 years, the only thing that kept me alive was knowing she was out there somewhere, living a normal life. Then I broke, and they took her, and I thought..." She broke. "I thought I'd destroyed the one good thing I'd ever done." "You survived. That's what matters. You stayed alive long enough for me to find you both. Why did you help us, Alistar? Really, you could have ignored that signal, could have finished your burger and driven away." Alistar was quiet for a long moment, watching Luna crouch to let waves wash over her feet. A vampire king who had spent centuries in war and decades in hiding, now standing on a porch in a forgotten town with a woman he'd thought dead and a child who had signaled for help using a code from another age. "The trafficking ring will retaliate. When they realize what happened, they'll send people to find us, to find you."
"I know. It won't be safe. Not for a long time. Maybe never. I know that too. And you still want me to stay." Serena met his eyes. "You always return. That's what I told Luna. Every time I needed you, every time the world fell apart, you always returned. Maybe it's time you stopped returning and just stayed." From inside the house, Luna called out, "Alistar, do you like blueberries and pancakes?" He smiled, surprising himself with how natural it felt. "I should probably go help before she burns down the kitchen." "Probably," Serena agreed. But before he could move, she caught his hand. "Thank you," she said again, "for giving us a chance at this, at normal, whatever normal means for people like us." "Normal is overrated," Alistar said. "But family..." He looked at Luna's silhouette moving past the kitchen window. "That might be worth staying for." He went inside, leaving Serena on the porch, with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness this time, but from something she had thought she would never feel again: hope. Inside, Luna was indeed burning pancakes while simultaneously trying to juggle blueberries and singing a song about mermaids. Alistar rescued the pan with supernatural reflexes while she laughed. "You have to teach me to move that fast," she said. "Maybe when you're older. Mom says you're really, really old, like ancient old." "Your mother is very polite." She giggled and started a new batch of pancakes, this time with Alistar's guidance. Through the window, they could see Serena still standing on the porch, watching the ocean, finally allowing herself to believe they might actually be safe. For the first time in 400 years, Alistar felt something he thought he had lost forever. Not just purpose, but belonging. A reason to stop running,
A reason to stand and fight for something smaller than kingdoms, but infinitely more precious. A family. His family. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher. Inside, a little girl who had survived trafficking and laboratories and horrors no child should face was laughing over burnt pancakes while her mother healed. And a vampire king who had forgotten how to hope slowly remembered what it meant to come home. The war wasn't over. It never would be. But for today, they had this: a house on a cliff, an ocean that stretched forever, and the simple magic of 3 broken people choosing to be whole together. It was enough. It was everything.